and welcome to episode 5 of Mad's World. A little bit of a different vibe in this week's episode. This is because, in place of my usual mental friends, we have our first expert, or should I say sexpert, guest, Alice Broster. Alice is a sex and relationships journalist who has written for multiple publishers in her time, including Bustle and Forbes. We chat about how a career in writing on sex and relationship begins, the way dating has changed over the last 10 years, the most unusual dating trends and strangest stories Alice has come across in her work, and what it was like to chat with Louis Theroux on consent. We also share a couple of our worst date stories and answer some of your questions that have come through, which is very exciting. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe if you enjoyed the show, and get in touch with me on @madsworld.mp3 on Instagram with any thoughts you've got. Our chat is quite juicy, so I'll let you enjoy the discussion. Hello, Alice.
Hi.
How are you going?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, this is so exciting. You're my first non-friend guest. I mean, we're yet to be friends, but first specialist, I suppose. So thank you so much for joining the show. So I guess to give the listeners a little bit of context, we can start with our speed date round. So this one's going to be a little bit different to the normal speed date round because you're a different kind of guest. So I thought we could tailor the questions like that. How did you start out writing about sex and relationships, and what made you want to pursue it as a career?
So I've always been quite open and interested in sexuality. So I am that friend who's begging for more details when someone's been on a date.
Yeah.
And I was told I needed a niche when I finished my degree, and I fancied myself a bit of a Carrie Bradshaw.
Oh yeah.
So I started a blog. It did not work out like that, by the way. But I started a blog, and then I started trying to get other pitches with publications, and I was trying to push myself to write about things that I considered to be more highbrow.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't landing. It wasn't what I was interested in. And I was like, well, if this is what you're interested in, then sort of lean into it. And
totally.
I think it's what everyone wants to talk about, isn't it? It's interesting.
Exactly. And I think as well, something I'm learning with doing this podcast is the importance of authenticity and just doing creative things that are actually what you're interested in. So I've kind of had some ideas for different episodes and that kind of thing. And it always comes back to stuff, me talking about passionately about stuff that I actually care about and connecting with different people. And so, yeah, it's interesting that you say that it was most effective when you're writing about stuff that you actually enjoyed talking to your girlfriends about or reading about or that kind of thing, because that's exactly what I'm learning with the podcast. So how do you do your research in the sex and relationships field?
So I think my biggest sort of source of knowledge and sort of resources have been experts and sort of sex therapists and things like that. Because I think because everyone can have sex and can go into relationships, you think that you know answers when maybe you don't. You assume that you assume you have your own expertise because you know how the way you do things, but maybe that's not. It's not the case for everybody at all.
100%. And I think talking to so many different people on the podcast has made me realize that as well, and hearing everything's subjective, isn't it, when it comes to sex and relationships, because everyone's had their own experiences and they're all so different. Sure. But so what are some of the best books that you've ever read about sex and relationships? So alongside all of that expert advice that you do when you're doing your research, have you read any really great books? I can link them in the episode description as well for everyone.
There's a podcast that I listen to called the Hotbed Collective, and they brought out a book called More Orgasms, Please, and it was kind of one of the first books I'd ever read that kind of was specifically about female pleasure and why it matters, and the fact that obviously orgasms are good for you as well as obviously being important. So that was kind of a really great book. And also Come As You Are by, I'm going to butcher her name, but Dr. Emily Nagoski. And again, it's about this sort of, even it's kind of rooted in science really, but it's about kind of how important it is to have a good sex life and the fact that everybody deserves to have a good sex life.
Okay, great. I'll link them in the episode description for everyone. But that's really great. Thank you. And how has dating and sex changed over the last 5 to 10 years, in your opinion?
I think I had the horrible realization the other day that I've been dating for a decade. So I was like, oh my god, ancient. But I think the obvious answer is obviously dating apps. I think they've really changed the game, maybe for better, maybe for worse, I don't know. But I think ghosting now is obviously a thing that maybe wasn't the case a decade ago, or certainly a decade ago. and the kind of navigating relationships. I think it's much more blurred now. It's not a case of you go on 3 good dates, you become exclusive, everything's very clear cut. I think now there's a whole, you've got to have the chat, you've got to connect, there's got to be chemistry. Some people think, some people have rules about when you sleep together. Obviously some people don't.
Yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity, isn't there?
For sure. And I think also people don't talk about it. So what might be right for you might not be right for the other person. It may leave you thinking, oh, they're not into me, or they're too keen. It's just difficult. It's really hard.
It's so hard to navigate, isn't it? Has the research you've done and the articles you've written for Bustle and amongst other titles as well, has that changed the way that you view sex and relationships? And does your work influence your own dating life?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm not super good at communicating my feelings if it's uncomfortable. And I think my work has taught me that pretty much everything can be solved with a cup of tea and a good chat. Like whatever it is, it's always good to communicate it. And I think there's also it's taught me there's a lot of toxic traits that we accept as normal or romantic, when actually they can be sort of borderline abusive. And I think looking back on my past relationships, there is a lot of stuff that I accepted as normal behavior when actually it really wasn't, and it's not something that people should accept.
Yeah, hindsight's 20/20, isn't it? When you look back on stuff, you can see things so clearly. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've definitely had a similar experience looking back on my past relationship from last year where I was cheated on, and things didn't really end that well. I think in the moment it's so subjective and you're just so immersed in the feeling of everything, and then you can look back on it and think, that's what my friends were talking about, and if I can just treat myself the way that my friends do and care about yourself the way your friends care about you, you would do things so differently. But so I think another thing I'm really realizing, because as of today, I'm 73 days sober, I'm realizing, like, I love how you said you can solve things over a cup of tea and a chat, because for me at the moment, normally in the past, it would be over a pint and a chat, and I would be, it's kind of like the social lubrication that you get, and it's a lot easier to say things, say what you really mean and that kind of thing. But now that I am sort of forced to deal with emotions and deal with my feelings and relationships in a sober space, it's very challenging to speak to people and say what I really mean without being embarrassed or being shy or being afraid. And I think that's really great if you can sit down, have a cup of tea and chat about things, but it also can be really challenging.
And I think it's interesting that you say that, because I think so much of dating culture now is surrounded by going for a drink and making sure you have that one glass of wine before you go for Dutch courage. In reality, like that can be really difficult.
Yeah.
And it can lead you to, I know myself last year, I had a lot of other stuff going on in my life, and it led me to, I went on a few dates, whatever. Every day I would go on and end up wasted, and it wasn't even a bit tipsy. It was I was drunk. I could have gone to the club.
Exactly.
I was ready. And it's hard to then look at yourself and think maybe that's not the way, and that's really hard.
I think there's been dates when I was drinking too much on a date, and maybe they showed up and initially I wasn't really interested, but as the date goes on and you get drunker, your inhibitions loosen up. You're like, oh, maybe I do like them. And then it kind of leads to X, Y, Z. And you're sort of like, was I making that decision in the right headspace? And you can wake up the next day and think that wasn't even me. I didn't even really want to do that sort of thing. And it's interesting. I've been on a few sober dates, and I'm planning to do an episode about sober dating with someone who is an ex alcoholic and cocaine addict, and they've turned it around and they're over a year sober now. And just the difference between dating sober and dating while drinking. Not that I've got anything against it, but I just think for me it was a bit of a rabbit hole. So this is where we're going to get to some of the juicy stuff. So what is some of the most unusual dating trends that you've come across in your work and your research?
Earlier this year, I was a massive fan of Fleabag, and earlier this year I heard of the term fleabagging. Ooh. So obviously I was like, ooh, what is this? Yeah. And apparently it's when you consistently date the wrong person. Oh. So I was like, okay, I see that. Yeah. And a friend actually, we were talking earlier a few weeks ago, and she said that she'd been Kanye'd, and I was like, sorry, what? And she was talking to a boy that was excessively into himself, and I was like, I like that, I'm going to take that. That will be mine.
That's stunning. Imagine that you're that influential that you have a a dating style named after you. Imagine getting Aliced or getting married.
Oh God, I hope it would only be positive.
I know. I feel like it never would be if you've been named after something, though. There's not many of those trends that are positive, is there?
Oh God, no, absolutely not.
Oh, so Fleabagged. I love that. Yeah, Fleabag is a stunning show. I think that I saw the other day that last scene where in the last episode with the priest where she tells him she loves him, and I think I cried at a meme.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know how she did it, but it's
Oh,
the last scene that gets me out. It's so funny and so brutal throughout the whole thing, and then that last scene, I'm like, oh God.
oh, it's fantastic, isn't it? I think it definitely deserves a rewatch.
Oh,
So this is a good one. What is the strangest story that you've heard through your work? And feel free to tell more than one.
I spoke to someone for a piece, I think it was at the end of last year,
Mm-hmm.
and it was we were talking about when's the right time to call off a date. So is it ever excusable to walk out of a date, things like that. And she'd gone on a double date with a friend. Her friend had set it up, and while her friend was having a lovely time with this guy she was with, her date spent the whole night he was talking about the drugs he takes on the regular, which if that's your thing, that's fine, but I'm just not sure it's date chat.
Yeah, first date chat as well. It's like, give it a few dates before you let on that, you're a massive heroin addict.
Literally, bold. And his past sexual exploits, he went into great detail about kind of the girls he'd slept with and things like that, which I just think is very disrespectful and
charming.
Yeah, and really flirting very, very heavily with the waitress to the point that she was quite uncomfortable. So apparently, to be at the table, it was quite uncomfortable. And at the end of the day, she kind of assumed they both understood that neither of them were interested in each other and it had gone badly. And it was just a funny story for her. And he messaged her and was like, "You're so wonderful. I had such a lovely night with you. I know it's a bit quick, but I'm really into you. I must see you again." And she was like, were we on a different date? We're at different tables.
This just comes back to that subjectivity thing. People can view situations so differently, can't they? It's insane.
And
wow.
she was like, he can't have read the room, because she was actively uncomfortable. So was the waitress, and so was the other couple.
Oh my God. Just not in the same room, not on the same date at all.
And then the other one that springs to mind is earlier in the summer, I spoke to someone who we were talking about, can you only date people with the similar political opinions to you? And she said she'd gone on a date with a guy from Tinder. She works in music radio. He works at a bank. And he spent the whole night sort of critiquing her work, basically saying that she was a bit messy, but he could help her and whatever, despite having no expertise in the area, but whatever. And a lot of her work is to do with bringing through female artists and Black female artists specifically. And he said his passion would be to sort of speak for these Black female artists specifically, and and she was like, well, don't you think it's more important to give them the platform themselves? And he basically blew up in the middle of this restaurant, went from 0 to 100, calling her a sexist, saying that she doesn't think that men should have opportunities and And she was like, I don't understand what happened. She had to walk out because he was shouting so loud. She said it was so embarrassing.
Oh my God. You know what? This reminds me of a date, and I'm so glad you've brought up dating people with different political opinions to you. So I went out with a guy. Our first date was at Simmons in Soho, and the first clue should have been that we were quite different, should have been when a homeless guy came up to me. It's quite common in Soho to get asked for money and that kind of thing. And I thought I could impress this guy by showing my humanitarian side and being really generous. And I was like, of course, here, have £2. And having a £2 coin is so rare. I never even have it. And I gave it over and I was just like, look at me. And then he's like, don't you just think he's going to spend it on drugs though? And I was like, oh, not like this. And that should have been my first clue, but he was gorgeous, a rugby player, really, really physically attractive. And we went on probably 4 dates, and it kind of didn't come up, our political opinions and our, fundamental values until the 4th date. And obviously we'd slept together by then, and that was great. And we were getting along really well. And he then invited me to meet him at a members club where he was working. So this was kind of clue 1. I rocked up in I think I was wearing jeans and trainers. So a fugly look. And we were sitting there, and because I mentioned that it was, like in a bantery sort of way, that it was kind of pretentious, like where we were and that sort of thing. And I looked around and I was like, I am just a fish out of water here. And then we started talking about gay marriage, because I think at this point it had just been legalized in Australia. So this is a couple of years ago. And he was like, I just don't see why gay people need to get married. And I was like,
Wow.
and my brother's gay, so at this point I had been like celebrating, and like for my brother who's living in Australia, it was like a huge deal. Like it's a huge deal for a lot of Australians, and I was kind of just like, I don't even know where to begin with this conversation. And
Yeah.
then we just got into this huge debate about class and about race and I'm just kind of like, you can't really have these such strong opinions when you come from such a place of privilege. Like, he was quite wealthy, he was white, he's a young male. I'm like, you're entitled to have your opinions and that kind of thing, but do you think that you should feel so strongly about maybe things that you don't really understand? Like, you're not really in a minority. And he's just like, oh, what, you think I've never been marginalized? And I was like, well, like, not really. And he goes, well, try being a dumb person who went to private school. That's
Oh,
marginalized. And I was like,
wow.
oh my goodness. And I literally got up and walked out. And he texts me afterwards. He's like, so good to see you, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, excuse me. I could never hang out with him again. Like, what? Oh, it was stunning, really. So yeah, I think dating someone with different values to you is quite tricky, because you can have everything else in common. I don't know how it took so long for it to come up on the date, but yeah, that was quite interesting. So our final question for speed date round is, who is the most interesting person you've met through your work?
I've spoken to some like really interesting experts. I've managed to have some really interesting kind of conversations and stuff. But I did an interview with Louis Theroux last year, and I'm a massive
Oh,
Louis
beautiful.
Theroux fan, so that was like a massive deal for me. But we were talking about his documentary on sexual assaults on university campuses. So we got to have this kind of big conversation about consent and what consent looks like and how to get it and why it's so important in 2020 and the effects that alcohol can have when gaining consent and stuff. We just ended up having like a really big conversation about how, especially at universities, there is a massive sort of endemic of abuse and assaults, and it's just not spoken about.
Yeah, that's so exciting that you got to interview Louis Theroux.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah, so was the conversation that you had with him, was it like what you expected, or it sort of took a different turn then?
Well, it was interesting because I was interviewing him about the documentary, but in true him fashion, it ended up being like he kept asking me questions, and I was like, "No, Louis, this is not how this works." But yeah, it was interesting. He shared kind of a lot of interesting. I think it's difficult when you speak to other people about things like consent, because it is you worry that maybe they're not going to have the same views, or they're going to think there's grey areas or whatever. He was very interesting. He said it made him reflect a lot on a lot of stuff in his life and the difference in sort of dating and relationships now, and it was very interesting. Yeah.
The premise of the show is sharing our bad date stories and sort of normalizing those. So you told me an interesting story about a guy who you had an experience with at the end of a date when you'd had a little bit too much to drink. So do you want to talk us through that, and then I can share one of mine?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd gone on a date with this guy. I think we'd met on Tinder, so hadn't met before. And I think pretty much as soon as we arrived, we kind of done like introduction, whatever. It was quite clear we weren't super into each other. Like there wasn't a massive spark, but he was nice, and we were like, well, should we just have a few drinks, have a good time, whatever? Sort of don't waste the night. We ended up having a few drinks, not enough to be like drunk, or I wasn't drunk anyway. And then he definitely was. So he was like swaying. He was not all there. So I was like, listen, there's cabs outside. I'm going to go home. I live down the road. I'll walk. It's fine. See you later. And he was like, no, I will walk you home. I insist. And I was like, no, at this point, like if something happens, I'll be defending you. So I don't need you to. It's fine. And he was like, no, let me walk you home. Da, da, da. So I was like, fine. So we get to it's literally 5 minutes to my house. So we get to my house. He sort of stood on my doorstep and he's sort of sidestepping. And I was like, oh God, what's he doing? So I was like, do you want to do you need a toilet, or are you okay? And he was like, yeah, I'm fine. And he just sort of stood there, and he had light wash jeans on. and he wet himself. And it
Oh
was
my
just so
God.
visible because his jeans were so light blue. And he just stood there and didn't acknowledge it.
What? So he's just stood in front of you, wet himself on your doorstep, and he's just not brought it up.
No, just not even like. And then he went to hug me goodbye, and I was like, no, I don't think so.
Oh, Alice, no.
So I was just like, listen, bye. Walked in and like into my house and closed the door and like screamed because I was like, what has just happened? And my flatmates calmed down and I sort of told them and they were like,
oh my God. It's almost like, did he even realize? Like, was he that drunk that he didn't even realize what's going on?
that's what you worry, isn't it?
Oh my God. Oh, that reminds me of a story. So I was dating a guy, let's just call him Alex, and he was telling me a story. So this actually didn't happen to me, but it's one of those ones that becomes an urban legend, and everyone you tell to all your friends and that kind of thing. But he had a new flatmate move into his house, and it was a girl. He said she was lovely, really liked getting to know her and everything. And then one night, it was the middle of the night, like 2 a.m. And he woke up to the sound of what he thought was marbles rolling around on the floor. And he woke up and put the light on, and he sees the new roommate facing the wall, squatting down, just having a piss on the floor in his room, squatting and peeing in his room. And he was obviously like just speechless. He says, hello, like, what are you doing? She's sleepwalking. And yeah, she sleepwalked into his room, opened the door, squatted and peed on the floor, and then just gets up, walks out and goes back to bed. And the next morning he's dreading going down to the kitchen. He's like, I can't face this girl. He comes down, she's cooked pancakes. She's like, morning, you're right. I've made pancakes, and had absolutely no memory of it. From then on, he never told her because he didn't want her to be embarrassed, and he just got a lock on the door so she couldn't do it again.
Oh, bless him.
I know, and he was like, she wasn't even drunk, like she just came into the room, squatted, did a wee, and then left. And I was like, you are such an angel for like, imagine if someone told you you'd done that and had no clue. Like, maybe God. Alice, maybe you or I have done that before, and our housemates have just never told us.
Don't say that. I'd have to move out. I'd fully have to leave.
Honestly, it's so humiliating. But oh God, I mean, we've all been there. We've all had a few drinks, and I mean, I know I have done a Charlotte from Geordie Shore and wet the bed, or that kind of thing. But yeah, so this brings us to our left on red round, which is named so because being left on red makes us question everything about ourselves. And I've asked everyone on Instagram and the listeners to reach out with their questions, because we've got a dating specialist on the line, lovely Alice, to help us in a little bit of an agony aunt segment. The first one we've got through is, what's the dating scene like comparing where you're from to where you are now? So I think this one was directed at me personally, but I think when I was living in Australia, I had a boyfriend for 5 years, so I never really dabbled in the dating scene while I was living over there. But from what I hear, I think when you're from a smaller town, dating is a little bit more serious back home. Like if you're going out with someone, it's not like it is in London. London's this weird bubble where everyone, stays young until they leave and kind of stays in this non-committal, non-serious, like crazy place where you can go out, meet someone, have a great time, go and have a shag, and then sort of that's the end of that, and it's quite normal. Literally. Whereas in your hometowns, I think gossip is rife, and it's quite different to that. But where are you from originally?
So I'm from a place between Manchester and Liverpool, up north, so a place called Warrington. And I agree, I completely agree. I think if you're going to date, well, if I was going to date there, which I have done, you've got to accept that you're going to date someone you went to school with, and
exactly.
You've got to accept that people are going to talk. And when you break up, people are going to talk, and there's much more of an expectation that you're going to settle down.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the same as in Melbourne, where I'm from. But yeah, I think dating in London, it's so different and always changing, and sometimes it can even be quite transactional, which is something we've spoke about on previous podcasts. But the great thing is as well is that you can meet someone who is from a totally different walk of life and get to know them and their story. And I think, as you said, you'll end up dating someone in your hometown that you did go to school with, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is a little bit more serious when there's that that sort of pressure coming from outer sources.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think, like you say as well, it's a thing of like, you're not maybe going to meet in London, you are unlikely to meet someone from exactly the same place that you're from unless you're from a big city. The dating at home is just a lot smaller, maybe. It's just a lot more intimate. People know.
And people's parents know,
Yeah.
and there's just gossip in all different kinds of circles. I feel like it's a lot of pressure. So I'm kind of enjoying being far away from all of that and kind of having having autonomy to do whatever I want. Our next question is, how do we avoid feeling shame about past experiences, do you think?
I think this one's really hard. And I think it's not pleasant. Like, you've got to look at where the root of that shame comes from. And I think that's not easy. And I know I've had stuff that I've worked through with, and I've sometimes turned to friends about, and I've sometimes turned to like a therapist about. And I think it's ultimately good for you and it will ultimately benefit you in the future. But I think actually you've got to sort of do the work. And I think it's really hard. It's not pleasant. But actually, ultimately, when you do it, you'll probably end up feeling much, much better about yourself.
Agree. And I think looking to the root of feeling that shame is really important as well. And alongside sort of doing the work for yourself, I think a lot of people have gotten in touch with me about the podcast and the fact that it is a fun podcast and it is all like a bit of a laugh and stuff. But a couple of people have said that it's become a bit more than that for them because it sort of normalizes those shameful experiences or experiences that they felt to be shameful, when actually everyone is kind of living these experiences and kind of living the same sorts of experiences. But maybe if you feel shame about something, you don't speak about it with your friends and you don't speak about it with the people you love. So you can't relate and you can't sort of have a laugh and take things with a grain of salt, because you get wrapped up in your own head and your own psyche, and you just kind of, lock things away because you might feel ashamed of them or think there's something to be embarrassed about, when really we're all doing the same thing. And if we can normalize it and talk about our experiences, it can be quite liberating.
For sure. And I think there is power in that sort of Me Too aspect of having podcasts like this, because I think if you're hearing other people talk openly and people can see themselves reflected in that, it's definitely powerful. I think it can empower other people to talk about their own experiences.
So the next question we had was, how do you know when it's the right time to make a move on someone? So I think this, for me, is especially hard now that I'm not drinking, because it's quite easy. I mean, I would consider it quite easy. I don't know about everyone else out there. If you've had a couple of drinks, you've got the social lubricant in, and it's a lot easier to sort of jump someone's bones and plant a kiss on them if you're feeling the time is right. But yeah, it's sober dating. I'm finding it really hard to know when the moment is coming. You overthink everything. I'm like, do they want to kiss me? Like, they're moving closer. Like, is this what's going to happen? Whereas when your inhibitions are low from alcohol, you just sort of dive right in and that kind of thing. But what would you say? How would you know when it's the right time to make a move on someone?
I think this can be like so hard, and like you say, there's no sort of one size fits all answer for everybody. And I'm a massive wuss, so like until I know for sure, I'm like, oh no, can't do it. But I think if like the chat's going well, like if you're sat down, sat very close, if you're stood very close, I think it's sort of fairly safe to assume. And if you're unsure, maybe sort of go halfway, test the waters. If you're not met, it's fine. Nothing's lost.
Just dip a toe, dip a little toe in the water and move closer and that kind of thing. Yeah. I feel like that's good advice. I'm going to take that on. Maybe, just go 50%.
See if you're met.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And this was one that we had from another listener. How do we educate men on how hard it is to make a woman orgasm? So this one is a really interesting question. It's quite a woke question, and I'm glad someone's asked it, because I honestly don't even know where to start with this question. So it's lucky we've got the specialist on the line. What would you say for this one?
I think when we think about talking about sex and things that are lacking perhaps in our sex life, we think we're going to offend another person, when in reality it will help them. So I think you can either in the bedroom, you can either show someone like what you need to get there, or even just talking about it outside the bedroom, just sort of have a sit down, like if you're having like a bit of a sexy chat or whatever, normalize conversations about clitorises and things like that, because that's what most women need in order to orgasm, and also is what's usually left out. But if someone doesn't know, then they can't they can't help you, they can't do it, and actually they probably want to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think porn has a massive influence on it as well. I think like there's not enough representation in porn, and probably the porn that men are choosing to watch. Yeah, no, that's really good advice. I think just having that open conversation, but it can be really difficult for people sometimes. So, I mean, if it's someone that you're with and you trust and that kind of thing, then yeah, hopefully that makes things a little bit easier.
Sure.
So the next question we had, this one is such a subjective question. And I mean, it really depends on the situation, but why do people cheat? The question was actually, why do men cheat? But
Okay.
I don't think that was fair. So why do people cheat?
I think, like you say, this is like a super subjective question, and people do cheat for different reasons. But I think for some people, the grass just is always greener on the other side. So the idea of wanting what you have until you've got it, and we do live in such a visual time now. We have Instagram and things like that. Everybody's life looks much better than our own, and I think also it's quite easy to cheat now. You can do it and not be found out. I just think, but I think as well, I would always say if you've been cheated on, it's not you. It is to do with them.
100%. And I think as well, what you just said about it being more easy and more accessible, we sort of touched on this in last week's podcast about sugar dating and the amount of guys, when I was doing some research on seeking arrangements, the amount of men that had married but looking in their profile was just shocking to me. I think, and as I said last time on the podcast, cheating seems to be, in my head at least, something that happens accidentally. But there's a lot of people out there that are, like you said, the grass is always greener, and they're looking for that sort of change in their life, which was quite shocking to me. But yeah, I guess as we said, it's so subjective, and people cheat for all different kinds of reasons.
And I think people are cleverer about it now. You know, you can compartmentalize your life, you can hide messages, you can take a ring off.
Yeah, 100%. And my ex said something interesting when the months had gone by after what happened, and I sort of said, why did you do that? Like, what actually made you do that? And he said something really interesting that sort of stayed with me, and it sort of it was a little bit gaslighty. It made me feel like it was somehow my fault. But he said that he was never ready to commit to me, and he felt like if he didn't commit to me, then he would have lost me. And so it's sort of like having your cake and eating it too, like kind of, committing to me just because then he'd have me all to himself type thing. And then, still just going out and doing what he wanted to do. So, yeah, I guess it is quite a selfish decision.
100%. So it's like, you can't have anyone else, but I will have you and others.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's such a strange feeling. But so this is our final question. And this one was from a girl who submitted it through Instagram. What is your advice on feeling sexy in the bedroom with a new partner? ... I'm nervous. So yeah, so this was quite a good question. And especially, again, I know I'm going back to it. I sound like a broken record. With the sober thing, this has been really hard for me because I think, we've always got, and I sound like a broken record, alcohol is that social lubricant. It sort of takes the pressure off a little bit. It makes things feel a bit less clunky and a bit awkward. But what would you say? What's your best advice on feeling sexy with a new partner?
I think never underestimate the power of new underwear. I feel like new underwear is always good. So if you're feeling good, if you're looking good, you'll probably feel quite good, even if they don't notice or whatever, because I think boys can be useless for that, but we move. And I think if you are really nervous about it, try initiating kind of sexy, if you trust the person, obviously you've got to have full trust. Try initiating sexy chat with them kind of beforehand, either over text or in person. Just sort of ease yourself in, just so when you're kind of in the bedroom or wherever, and it starts, you're not feeling like, oh my god, it's happening, like it's beginning.
And it can be a bit strange as well, especially if it's with a friend or with someone that you've sort of fallen into a relationship with and you haven't been there before. It can be, I don't know if you've seen on Friends when Rachel and Joey end up together and she just laughs. And I'm like, that's so relatable, and sometimes I think I've definitely been there in the past with a friend from Australia. We were friends for so long back home, and then he moved over here, and there was a time when we finally kissed. We're at a festival, and then it started escalating. I was like, this is wrong. Like, this feels like Luke and Leia. I'm like, we need to just stop. And then we just started laughing about it and having a chat. I'm like, this is how you know that it's men and women can be friends, because we're both just like, this is gross.
Yeah, 100%. I know I hooked up with a friend when I first moved to London, and it like sort of started, and then I just wouldn't stop talking, and he was like, Alice, shut up, like stop talking. And I was like, sorry, I'm just like, this feels really weird.
Oh God. Well, that's all the questions we've had from everyone at home, but was there anything else that you wanted to say, or a note that you wanted to leave it on?
No, I think it's just I think it's so positive, like having conversations like this. Like, I've loved speaking to you, thank you for having me on. And I think having conversations like this does just create like a normality around it, which I think is so positive, and everyone does deserve to have the sex life or the relationships that they want to have. So talking about it only makes it better.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been awesome, and it's very exciting to have someone with so much interesting insights and so much to say for themselves. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Alice. Please let me know on my Instagram at madsworld.mp3 if you have any stories or thoughts of your own to share. Love and elbow taps. Peace.